All right, so let's go ahead and start with what everybody's talking about worldwide. Tonight, Russia is inviting the United States to send inspectors to verify the accusations against Russia, right? But at this point, it seems the nuclear arms treaty may not really be salvageable. Nonetheless, Mr. Putin is sending a message to Mr. Trump that he is still willing to talk if Washington chooses to give them an opportunity to do so.
The declaration of the intention to withdraw from the INF Treaty has become just another step in a sequence of similar actions. It's obvious that such a course will have the gravest consequences. Despite the United States' declared intention to withdraw from the INF Treaty, we are open to further dialogue on ways of preserving the treaty.
So he says he's open to further dialogue. Mr. Bolton, meanwhile, speaking for the president, has so far refused any further talks with Moscow. Two questions come to mind here on the question of Russia and the United States. What does this mean globally, and who is really behind it?
There are elements in the administration who just want to withdraw. They want to escalate the arms race. Their goal is, quote unquote, to achieve regain nuclear supremacy. This is actually hugely important. It'll be very dangerous, not just for the United States and Russia, but for the entire world, if we see the continuation of this decline in arms control and a resumption of a full-fledged arms race. And some people say, well, there are other nuclear powers such as China and other countries. But rather than tearing up the INF Treaty, what should be done is to expand it to include other countries. That would be a logical way to proceed. Tearing up the treaty is going to be it's going to be a milestone that has a potentially disastrous consequences, very dangerous.
Well, the idea that we survived the Cold War and are now seemingly returning there is more than just a scene from Back to the Future, as we mentioned earlier, at least for European leaders who seem tonight very concerned about what could come next.
We regret the withdrawal announced by the US. We see this treaty as a very important arms control instrument and something that also serves European interests and therefore also German interests.
The announcement by the US that it's going to withdraw from the INF Accord is regrettable. The INF Agreement has been an important pillar of our European security architecture for 30 years. For us in Europe, it's of great importance. We call on the US to consider the possible consequences.
The US and Russia need to remain engaged in constructive dialogue to preserve the treaty and to ensure that to ensure its full and verifiable implementation, which of course is crucial for Europe's and global security.
John Jordan is a frequent guest of ours who we can say is a man who's actually worn a uniform. His background is naval intelligence, so he's really the perfect guy to have on to have this conversation. John, thanks for being with us. I think you're going to be proud of me today. I spent some time doing some research on this stuff, and it makes your head spin trying to figure out what all these ICBMs and all these things are. But here's what I was able to come up with, which I need your help on. So the reports that I read on the question about whether Russia really is cheating, as the United States is accusing them of, are twofold. The first one that I read is, and you can help me with this, is that Russia is doing something with something called the RS-26. I bet that RS does not stand for Rick Sanchez, by the way. RS-26, that Russia has somehow modified this RS-26 into a ICBM. That's the first charge. Can you help us with that?
They may have done that. It's hard to know for sure. Stepping back, the big picture in the lead up to this segment was we can't overlook the domestic political angle in the United States for this. Donald Trump is desperate to look like he's being tough on Russia, and this is kind of an easy way for him to do that. Militarily, the technology has changed so much since 1987 when the INF Treaty was signed that both sides, especially the United States, has the ability to deliver nuclear weapons using a variety of platforms. But what is so under talked about, and I think we could spend a lot of segments on this, is how badly the West understands Russia and Russian sensibilities on this. I mean, Russia's suffered tens of millions of dead in 2 world wars, Western intervention in the Russian Civil War, and since the collapse of the Soviet Union has seen the expansion of NATO to its very borders, including former Soviet republics, where the Russians feel largely encircled by NATO and the West right now. And this has set off a lot of alarm bells that are historical in nature, and the West has impact on Russian psychology that the West really doesn't understand, I think to its great cost.
Well, you know, I mean, listen, to be fair, if the United States is saying we're doing this because the Russians are cheating, and the 2 areas of concern for the United States today were this RS-26 thing, also that Russia is testing a ground-launched intermediate cruise missile. What I found on a cursory examination of both think tanks and military groups inside and outside of Washington is that that stuff is very difficult to prove and that there's no smoking gun. But the question that comes to my mind is, supposing that the Russian had stepped beyond whatever their original agreement between Reagan and Gorby was, why wouldn't there not be an effort to try and reach out to the Russians and reach out to Putin and say, hey, let's figure this thing out and make it right for the safety of the world, right? It doesn't seem like they're doing that, though.
No, they're not, and it's for the reason we've talked about just a second ago, and that has to do with American domestic politics and the needs of the Trump administration to have something to hang their hat on with regard to being tough on the Russians. I agree that dialogue prior to withdrawal from the INF Treaty makes the most sense, and I think that would be the wiser course of action. But that's not what's been taken here. But again, it's because of American domestic political circumstances.
Well, you know, yeah, it's funny because as the more I read today, the more I found that a lot of the folks who are in the Trump administration now are the same people who've kind of been pulling for this, very thing all along. Some of the same people, in fact, who were, as we know, part of the run-up to the war in Iraq, et cetera, et cetera. And now we read that the Trump administration is announcing that they're going to place ground-based interceptors in Alaska's radar. Alaska, yeah, you heard that right. Alaska's radar sensors to shield American cities. Sounds Star Wars-ish, doesn't it?
It does at first glance. Here's how that works. This is a completely different issue militarily from the INF Treaty. The ground-based interceptors that are in Alaska, and there are some in California too, in Vandenberg, just north of Santa Barbara. These are designed to intercept small numbers of ballistic inbounds, i.e. from Korea potentially, or from Iran. They are completely incapable of dealing with a full-fledged Russian or even a Chinese ballistic missile attack. So these are limited in scope. Interestingly enough, there was a lot of controversy with Russia about the deployment of similar interceptors in Poland, which President Obama scrapped. These have become a political football and are very sensitive, and the Russians are very sensitive about this. And historically, I can kind of understand why, even though they do not represent the ability by the United States to negate Russian nuclear deterrence.
John Jordan, as usual, we thank you, sir, for sharing some of your wisdom with us on this newscast. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.